Hello, my name is Lynn James, and this is schedules of reinforcement on a fixed ratio and random ratio on a chelid fish. Numerous studies have been conducted throughout the years regarding reinforcement and shaping a new skill. More now than ever, individuals have been influenced to see if the same impact on shaping and reinforcement can be conducted on a variety of different animals as well. A handful of research studies have been done on pigeons, monkeys, and rats. But can these same contingencies work for any animal, such as a fish? A study done by Eskin, Bitterman, and College was done on a tilapia on a fixed interval and fixed ratio performance to control hunger. The results indicated that the rat of responding were higher than those of animals. In this experiment, the first demonstrated a fixed ratio of reinforcement, and a fixed ratio is a schedule of reinforcement that requires a fixed number of responses in order to get reinforced. The second study was on a random ratio of reinforcement where the reinforcement was scheduled randomly. In order to conduct the study, reinforcement needs to be paired with a feeding wand. In an article mentioned by Storm, stated he used a visual reinforcer to teach the fish to use a sensitive lever deflection device to reinforce itself for food. In this study, a feeding wand was paired as a reinforcer to teach the fish different reinforcement schedules and shape different behaviors. By pairing anything visual to signal reinforcement, in this case the wand, this would be considered the visual reinforcer. There is a limited amount of studies to support the evidence that a fish can be placed on fixed and random reinforcement, and the intent of this study was to discover how effective the two schedules of reinforcement would be after teaching a new skill to the fish. Experiment 1, the subject was one adult electric yellow cichlid male fish and was used for the study. He was fed Hikari staple medium pellets. The fish was fed once a day at 9 p.m. with one pellet through the feeding apparatus. The water in the tank was kept at 70 degrees throughout the entire experiment, and the apparatus that was used in this current study, the fish was placed in a 10-gallon training tank with no lid, and at the bottom of the tank, white sand was evenly distributed before the fish was placed. To prevent any distractions during the experiment, the tank was clear of any of that to ensure proper data. The slalom involved getting the fish to go in a zigzag motion through 4 upright poles, similar to a slalom skier. In order to set up the apparatus, the 4 red posts were attached to the black R2 fish school platform and then placed in the middle of the tank. Training took place during feeding time to influence correct responding and pairing reinforcement for the correct task. The pellets were soaked in water for 5 minutes prior to feeding time to prevent the food from floating up. In order to shape the fish's behavior in responding to the slalom platform, the following steps had been conducted. First, the feeding wand was paired as a reinforcer prior to the training phase. Once the pairing of the reinforcer was completed, the baseline of the platform was next. The platform was placed in the middle of the tank for 3 minutes and then removed without any prompting or reinforcement. After 1 minute had passed, the platform was reintroduced and placed in the middle of the tank, along with the feeding wand, which was placed at either the left or the right end of the apparatus and reinforced for each approximation of him coming near the apparatus. The 1 minute break was to ensure that the fish had finished chewing the reinforcer and ready for the next feeding. After reinforcement for the approximation of the fish coming near and going through each post, the fish followed the wand throughout the slalom course through all 4 posts without stopping or having to redirect. Once the fish was able to pass from either the right or the left post one time, and then he would be reinforced. Once the fish was able to go through the slalom once with minimal prompting training, he was over for the day. This was also to prevent overfeeding the fish, and there was only about 2 to 3 trials that were placed each day. Results: the fish took about 3 days to become desensitized and accept food directly from the wand. Training durations were about 3 minutes long. Once the fish paired the wand as a reinforcer, teaching began. During baseline phase, the experimenter placed the apparatus into the middle of the tank, and the fish swam around it and began pecking at the platform, then swam away. No reinforcement was given during this time, and the experimenter then removed the stimuli and represented the platform after 1 minute had passed, along with the feeding wand to begin shaping the behavior. The feeding wand was reinforced the first time the fish went to the post 1. Then the fish swam out of the platform area and then had to be redirected to go through the remaining posts. Reinforcement was provided to him for returning to the course and swimming through the remaining posts. The first 3 trials were reinforced for each approximation of the fish going through each post and not swimming away from the course. On day 4 and 5, the fish was able to independently go through all 4 posts and got reinforced on a fixed ratio of 1. The results show what it was at baseline and how it went up after day 3 and 4. After experiment 1 was completed, experiment 2 was introduced. The same fish from experiment 1 served as the subject. The apparatus was built as a hoop, and this included a 3-inch wide blue expansion hoop connector with tubing, a red hollow post, and a black weighted base to set the apparatus up. First, you needed the expansion tubing to be 3 inches wide, and then insert it into the tube, and then put the tube into the red post. During baseline phase, the hoop was placed in the center of the tank for 3 minutes. Once baseline was completed, the stimulus was then removed from the tank for 1 minute and then reintroduced for training. Shaping and reinforcement of the fish began by reinforcing any approximation of the fish coming near the apparatus. Once the fish is able to swim up to the hoop, the feeding tube was placed inside the hoop and pulled through to the other side to prompt the fish to go through the hoop. Once the fish mastered going through the hoop, began random ratio reinforcement. Random ratio reinforcement was done using 1 dice and was rolled prior to placing the stimuli into the water. As done in experiment 1, once the fish was able to go through the hoop with minimal prompting, training was over for the day. This was to prevent overfeeding, and about only 3 trials were conducted each day for this experiment also. Results: since the feeding wand was already paired as a reinforcer from experiment 1, there was no need to desensitize. During baseline phase, the fish swam to the base of the hoop and pecked around the bottom of the base. No reinforcement was given during this time. The wand was also placed into the tank and reinforced for any approximation of the fish swimming closer to the hoop. For 3 days, the fish had trouble coming near the top of the hoop and swimming through it. By day 4, the fish swam through the hoop by following the wand with less prompting. On day 5, the fish was able to independently follow the wand through the hoop and swim through the hoop on a random ratio reinforcement. Random ratio reinforcement, as mentioned earlier, is reinforcement at random, and each response has an equal chance of being reinforced. Random ratio was done through rolling 1 dice piece. The first number that came up was 1, and the fish swam through the hoop and was immediately reinforced. The stimuli was then taken out of the tank and reintroduced for the second trial. and so on for the next two. Discussion. Analysis of operant responding in a male fish between two schedules of reinforcement was conducted. During baseline phase, both experiments failed to produce differential responding, and in experiment 1, it was on a fixed ratio of 1, and on experiment 2, it was on a random ratio done by a roll of a dice, which ended up landing on 1, 3, and 2 as the correct responses that a fish needed to get in order to get reinforced. Next, future study would be to choose different breeds to see if their learning curve would be different, and also not to take as many breaks in between each trial. And another limitation was the time constraint to do the experiment. I was not able to expand the fixed ratio to longer than 1. The following link just shows how the experiment was done from baseline to training phase to the different reinforcement schedules.